I find statements like that.
I read that in your piece and I was horrified. I
Yeah,
was absolutely. I mean, when you have a United States president telling members of the Jewish community, listen, we love you, but
right.
the only place that's going to protect you is
Yeah,
that place over there with that Star of David with
yeah,
Bibi. That's the only place.
right.
I mean, he's basically telling you that like we can have a Holocaust over here.
Yeah, and
It's absurd.
it's really abject. I mean, I feel like Jews shouldn't be, Jews should be horrified by this, and many, some of them are not. They think yes, that's true, and I think it's horrific, but it's also, as you say, it's absolutely absurd. It's absolutely ridiculous. Um, and but everybody should be horrified by this, because the idea is that you can say to one group of people who are citizens of this country, you know, this isn't going to protect you. And that's just it's a betrayal of democratic values, but it's also, I think, a betrayal of the Jewish tradition in America, which understood, um, even very late into the 1930s. The biggest argument to Roosevelt by Jewish people was not the state of Israel; it was open up the border, let refugees into the country, because that's what they believed in, is that the United States could be a haven for oppressed people, um, not the state of Israel. Now, there's all kinds of complications with that story. It doesn't deal with the question of African Americans and other groups who have been oppressed in this country, but I think that's the basic thrust of the argument.
What do you think is the act? I mean, because people always are talking about organizations like ADL, AIPAC, and things of that nature, but how are they threatening the normal political relationship of non-Zionist Jews' ability to have a political voice in
Yeah,
this country, or even liberal secular Jews,
yeah.
liberal secular Zionist Jews?
It's a really excellent question. I'm glad you raised it. I mean, first and foremost, these protests on campus that we had all this past year, many of them involved Jewish students. I mean, they were broad coalitional protests. And so when the ADL and all these organizations start denouncing these protesters as anti Semites, who ought to, and not just calling them anti Semites, which is, if you're Jewish, I mean, if you're anybody in this country, that's a real stigmatizing label. And it's meant to be a way of delegitimizing, in this instance, people who are just critics of the state of Israel. But regardless of that, um, it's not just the label and the stigma. Then they, are starting to use all kinds of, provisions of the law to start, bringing charges against these people as, creating Title VI violations on campus, creating discrimination against Jewish students and Jewish professors, and so it becomes not just a way of delegitimizing protests against Israel. It really becomes a way of starting to punish people who are engaging in that activity, many of whom are Jewish. So it's not just a metaphorical attack on dissenters within the Jewish community. It's a real attempt to use the arm of the law in alliance with university administrators to try to silence people who happen to be Jewish. Excuse me.
That's incredible. So, do you see is there an internal debate within spaces within the Jewish community about how this is playing out? Is there are there rooms for discussion on these realities in Jewish places?
Absolutely. Well, I'm going to give you a two-part answer. The first part is that in many ways the discussion around Israel is been the most open and critical among Jews that I've seen in my lifetime. I broke with the state of Israel and Zionism back in the early 1990s, when I was in my 20s, and that was a really, a very difficult position to take. It creates it creates divisions among families and friends and all the rest of it. But I think in the last couple of years, you've seen, particularly among younger Jewish people, a real explosion in critical discourse around the state of Israel. And so I think that's the positive sign. I will say on the negative side that I think, synagogues have tended to get more shut down around this issue. And that's a real problem because the synagogue is the main institutional setting for collective Jewish life. And that really makes it difficult for people who are Jewish, want to be Jewish, want to affirm that Judaism is a weird religion for many people who are not Jewish because it's both a religion and a people, or a religion and a people, and that's sort of hard sometimes for others to understand. But if you want to partake in that sense of peoplehood, you oftentimes do it in a synagogue, and synagogues have become much more nervous around this question around the state of Israel. They tend to shut down a little bit more. So I think there's both an opening in non-synagogue spaces and on campuses and so forth, but there's also been a kind of closure as well. And I think there's a real right now, I think there's, I hate this kind of phrasing because it sounds so sort of sentimental and romantic, but there is a bit of a struggle over the soul of what it means to be Jewish. Not just in the United States, but I think across the world, people are really struggling with this question, which may seem, again, I understand if you're not Jewish, that may seem like, well, Crimea River, the state of Israel is killing Palestinians every day, and the struggle for the soul of the Jewish people may seem, pales in comparison to that. And I completely understand that position. Nevertheless, it's true that I think Jews are really struggling with this question of how to be Jewish without the state of Israel.
Would you not argue that the larger challenge is what Zionism means to Jewish people?
Yes, absolutely. And I think sorry about this. I think what's going on right now is, and I think part of why older Jewish people feel very threatened is that a lot of younger Jewish people are not just criticizing the state of Israel or criticizing Netanyahu or criticizing, Likud or the current policies. They are really breaking with the whole idea of Zionism and embracing, in certain cases, what we call a kind of diasporic model of Judaism. To say that, the truth of the matter is that historically, Judaism was a diasporic religion. We were a people who were scattered. The creation of the state of Israel is a fairly recent development in Jewish history. And so I think a lot of younger Jews are, really breaking, again, not just with the government and not just the leadership of the state of Israel, but with the whole idea of the state of Israel, to say, it's just not, it's not for me. It's not who I am. The piece, I say this in response to that Biden thing about, the state of Israel will protect you. The fact is that I'm Jewish. I'm not Israeli. And I know for a lot of people, those two things go together. But for most Jews, for a lot of Jews, they don't. I shouldn't say most. They don't go together. And I think you're seeing that, again, amongst younger Jews, really just saying, that's not who I am. That's not part of my sense of collective peoplehood.